Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Mentally Healthy Workplaces Asia podcast. My name is Wenli Lim, and I'm the Chief Impact Officer at Flourish DX and host of this podcast. So the purpose of this podcast is to have conversations, practical guidance from subject matter experts, service providers, innovative tech platforms, and employers in the region. So we believe in taking a shared responsibility approach to workplace mental health. So we'd love to talk to employers, individuals, colleagues, and really looking at this as a broader community to really create mentally healthy workplaces so we can prevent suffering and promote human flourishing. So today we have a very special guest, Jay Ng, who is the founder of We Shine. Hi, Jay. Welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Wen. Really happy to be here. I'm not so sure I'm special.
No, you are. Everyone is special. We all have different gifts and talents.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah. Well, Jay, just want to thank you for your time because I know you're really, really busy. Like a lot of startup founders, and especially being a sole founder, you've got a to-do list I can't even imagine how long. And also you're a father of two little ones. So maybe give us a glimpse a day in your life as a startup founder, just so that people can get to know you a little better.
I think first off the cuff is that we shouldn't really, or I try to remind myself that don't wear busyness as a badge of honor. And that is so important because especially in Singapore, where I'm from, everyone is just so busy and everyone is just so productive that sometimes busyness becomes a badge of honor and you go around and say, hey, how are you doing? Oh, I'm really busy. And is that really a good thing? I as I grow older, I remind myself that that's not really a good thing because it means that perhaps you're not as efficient as in prioritizing and things like that. And talking about mental health, I think there's some repercussion about leading a more balanced life. And I think balanced life does lead to better productivity, actually. Yeah, so just a little bit of that. I'm sure we'll
love
go
that.
much
Thank you.
deeper into that. What's my typical day? I start my day rather early. And the reason is because, again, I sort of like to experiment with things. And so my son is turning 7 and I have a newborn, a baby girl who is 8 months now. And so when I started being a father, I realized that, especially for my kids, it takes a long time to put them to bed. But as an individual, as a father, me and my wife, we know that, okay, this is something that we want to be involved in, putting the kids to bed, reading a storybook. And so then I realized it's not very efficient. So I have a couple of options in terms of how I lead my time. Do I put them to bed and then wake up in the night or not? So I kind of realized that it is not so efficient because when I put them to bed, I tend to fall asleep as well. Simple things like that.
I'm sure many parents do that
and
too.
It gets difficult for me to wake up and I'm not that productive. And it gets very hard to fall back to sleep after. So what I've done is I go to bed early with them, but I try to wake up early. So I'm talking about 4 a.m. But it's difficult because I'm a night owl. You see, there's a lot of conflicts in all of us. But I guess the more I try, the easier it gets. And I'm well rested generally. I start the day early. And I typically start the first 2 hours of the day on myself in the quiet of the early morning. Just spending quiet time. For me, I'm reading the Bible, things like that. And also thinking then about whatever requires a lot of my brain power, because I realized that the brain works the best in terms of thinking strategically and also maybe on reflection and also on creativity. So if I need if there's a problem that I'm really stuck at night, I try to do that early in the morning. So that's typically how I start my day by myself without anyone, but just trying to tackle some of these more difficult things with a focus also on my inner self. If I can use that term. Then I think the day tend to be quite hectic, which I think most people's days are. But of course now I think it's mostly Zoom. So I think that's still the case for me.
Yeah.
Before COVID, I think it's just lots of meetings, running around, meeting up with people. And then I try to have dinner at home.
Yep.
So, and most of them have been quite successful. And then the evening, I think, is family time. So after, and there's not that many hours actually. So after dinner, it tend to be like 7, 8, and then just again doing all the routine stuff of putting
Of being
getting
a
the beds
parent.
to getting
Yeah.
the children to bed actually. So all that thing.
Oh, great. Well, it sounds like you've kind of, got a bit of a schedule going and, even boundaries on when you keep time to yourself and all that. I think that's really great. So yeah, maybe we can dive into your career. I know you've done a lot of different things. Would you just like to share, how you started and what you've done? And also, I think what we really, just from talking to you, just having conversations around being a leader, and how even the experiences you've had informs how you now lead, and even leading teams, but even in the current startup, when you hire and you have a bigger team, it's how do you do that? So fire away.
In terms of career, I've been a bit of some called jack of all trades. I think that can be the way that I describe myself. So I've had professionally, I think mainly in finance. So I started in a bulge bracket bank. I've been in a very small hedge fund briefly. I also manage money for government agency. So mainly in finance, but across different types of organizations, which actually exposed me to different ways of working internally and culturally. From a very driven New York-based hedge fund, it's not a startup, but a small team, about 50, to government, which is a different creature altogether. So that's professionally. In between those times where I was working for people, I've started various things as well. In fact, my first business was in university, manufacturing laptop sleeves.
Wow.
Just distributing in the school on consignment.
Yeah.
But thereafter, I started a couple of things, had my fair share of failures. In fact, a lot more failures. I don't think So anyway, that led to, and then I took a break to do my master's actually in Cambridge. That's kind of like my quarter life crisis. But interestingly, I've thought about doing a master's, but I've never really gotten down to it. And then somebody actually over lunch told me, hey, there's this scholarship that the bond is very easy. You don't really, there is a bond, but it's very easy to fulfill. And you serve national service, don't you? So I'm from Singapore, we serve in the army. And then he says, hey, this is your chance to take back, your kind of rebate or whatever. I say, hey, that's a very good idea. So I submitted for the scholarship. I got it. And then they say, okay, but you need a school. So I said, okay, I don't have a school, So I look at whatever, and I don't have SAT. Is it SAT? No, it's not SAT. GMAT. Yeah. And I don't have GMAT because I've never thought of doing a master's. I was thinking about it, but I wasn't like actively going after it. So then I have a scholarship. I don't have a school. So I look at whatever there is 1 year and it doesn't require a GMAT. I found that there's only 2 schools I think that fulfills that requirement. And I selected Cambridge as one of them. So I said, okay. And then I told my wife, oh, actually this just happened. And I'm going to apply for school. If you get it, do you want to go with me? She said, okay, that's a good idea. And my son was already born by then.
Oh.
So we kind of told ourselves that this is like our sabbatical. So just take 1 year. Because I'm not a good student. So all my life, when I go to school, I don't study. So to me, I go to master's, I just got to be there and enjoy myself. And then I applied, I got it. So we spent 1 year in the UK. But that also allowed, so that 1 year was quite pivotal. It's a very important year in our lives. First, many things happened, but I think I can also say that it was a year that I got exposed to many things, because when I was in Cambridge, one of the reasons why I selected Cambridge was because I didn't just want to go to a business school. And just think about, and just network around people who tend to come out and say, okay, I'm coming back to investment banking or consulting. I deliberately wanted to go to, but of course I didn't have many choices because I don't have GMAT. But Cambridge was interesting to me because I think it allows me to network with, or to make friends actually, with many people that's so different from myself. And that's indeed the case. When I was there, I will be talking to like physicists and, just people who are awesome. And in the course that I did, there were like 50 of us, but I think coming from 35 countries, things like that. So I really love it. And for one whole year, although I was doing Master of Finance, but it allowed me to go to many other places around campus and listening to, for example, Stephen Hawking. When I was there, I was listening to some of the lectures that he gave. And that opened up my mind in terms of being, so by that time, I've been in my career for about 10 years. And sometimes we can feel very stuck in something, right? Especially when you're like 10 years, it gets very difficult to move to a different field. This allowed me time to think about what do I really want after, or rather for the next phase of my career. So that led me to, one thing led to another. I ended up serving my bond. So I had a bond, but also serving my bond, trying to contribute back to the fintech industry in Singapore. So that's what happened that led me to work on this blockchain B2B startup with my secondary school friend actually.
Yeah. And so maybe we'll touch on that one, because in that you basically grew a team, and you were, the co-founder and CEO as well. So I guess, like, in just talking about creating mentally healthy workplaces, there is a lot of tech startups in Singapore and in this region, and some of them are actually really great, like in terms of being very aware of mental health and looking after their teams. So maybe can you share, like, how was it like to lead a startup, and how did you, maybe just share some, some successes in terms of building it, but also how was that on your own mental health in terms of growing a fast-growing startup?
Right. So I was talking about my time in Cambridge, and then the next thing I talked about was this. But something happened in between, and wouldn't have told you about this before. I fell sick, and that was 10 months in total, infection related. The details of it it's not that important. But what's important is that this is actually pivotal on my life and my worldview. There's two very important things that happen that is pivotal. It changed the way I view many things, including my family. So my wife being true with me for both of these things, we are aligned. So what are these? Number one is that I had a near-death experience through my 10 months of being sick. And the first 2 months was in UK, and then so 8 months in Singapore. Now, the first 2 months I just briefly described. So I couldn't walk, I'm bedridden, and it's painful. And remember, after maybe 3 weeks, I can manage to get about 5 minutes of walk just below where I stay. I tell you, when I because it's UK, it's cold, and when I opened the door and I stepped outside, I was like, wow, it feels amazing to be able to walk and breathe in this air. I'm like, wow, this is heaven. Just being able to breathe the fresh air and to be able to walk. But it was very painful, so I could only walk like 5 minutes, I go back. Now, but throughout the entire 10 months, I had my so-called near-death experience. No, it wasn't really like I was dead and came back to, no, it's nothing like that. But I was lying there. I wasn't sure what's wrong. I was looking at my kid. I couldn't move, couldn't really talk much. And three things happened. As I'm lying there, you have a lot of time to think and reflect on your life. So three things came to my mind, which I hold on very tightly to today. Number one, health is important. The reason why I said that is very practical. it was really painful. And I'm like, how am I going to get through this pain? I remember I was on, so even when sometimes they inject me with a medicine that is something like a morphine, as I understand. So it's like the Panadol don't work anymore. But it's still really painful. And I find it very difficult to get through it because pain is something that I don't know how to describe, but it's kind of like, sometimes I describe it as when I was in the army, I broke my leg, and it's almost that kind of intensity of pain, but this lasted for 8 hours a day. It's really painful. So I'm like, okay, health is important because you don't want to go through something like that again.
Yeah.
So you better take care of your health. And I wasn't taking care of my health. When I was on the trading desk, I was drinking. I wasn't taking care of my health at all. So I'm like, okay, I better start taking care of my health next time. So that's one, right? Health is important. Now, secondly, relationships are important, and nothing that is in the material matters, because I wasn't thinking about anything material. I wasn't thinking about money, my car, nothing. I was thinking about, how did I treat my friends, previously? How's my relationship with my parents? I was looking at my son. I'm like, okay, I think he was about 2 years old then, one plus. I'm like, okay, this guy, if I pass away, then I cannot see him going to primary school, getting married and things like that. So I was just thinking about relationship. And of course, my wife, she's taking care of me and all that. And so I remind myself that ultimately life is about people, it's about relationship. I mean, sometimes we kind of know that, but at that moment, I know that it is true. I know that when I really pass away next time, I don't know whether I'm 40, 60 or 80, I'll be thinking about those things, right? So that informs me of how I want to view the world and the people around me today. Now, the final thing was about impact. I tell you, I look at myself and I think about what I do. And I say this with no judgment or offense to anyone who is doing any job, but just myself, I was a trader and whatnot. I look at myself, I'm like, am I really creating impact in my previous jobs? I think there is some that I can argue that, perhaps when I was running the money for government, I'm like handling public money and what. But in my heart, I'm like, I think the nurse was attending to me, brought me so much comfort, and she's really impacting me, a person. Again, here I'm talking about people. Of course, impact doesn't just mean people, right? There's a lot more to it. But I tell myself that whatever I'm going to do from now onwards, I think I need to think about impact. So that was pivotal, and I hold on to that. And that impacts how I want to build my team and so on and so forth. Now, the other thing was faith. So faith was pivotal to me. Because faith is an anchor. We have some enlightenment or some learnings, but there's an anchor. And for me and my wife, that's our faith. So back to the question about then how do I build a team, and perhaps using stats as an example. Stats was a little bit different because when we started, we actually already have quite a big team. So it wasn't started from ground up, from like 2%. It wasn't like that. So when we started, we already have a team of 50 developers in China. And then we started building more people here in Singapore. And as we grow, actually, we hired more in Singapore. And so the other team kind of like went down in terms of numbers. But basically, in terms of building culture, and then you talk about perhaps a technology firm that tend to have more male and whatnot, that is true. But I think ultimately it comes back to those things that I shared, the lesson that I learned: health, people, impact. It was really that, So from day one, I always tell the people a couple of things, and this kind of lay the foundation of culture. I say that to me, how well a startup is how good the people are, but also how well they work with each other. And that's people, right? In terms of health, now when you have very good people, they tend to be overachievers in terms of, they tend, at least the team I had, many of them like to work late hours, long hours. They're really hardworking. So then I find myself always telling them that, hey, look, you need to slow down. So in fact, I find myself telling them, you can slow down. It's okay, to take some time off. I don't need this tonight at 3 a.m. But don't be burnt out. So I remember I always spend time talking to people about how potentially, if you go on a certain trajectory, and because some of them are very young people, fresh out of school, they think they can take over the whole world. And I've been through that when I was in my 20s. I think that I can take over. So I cannot understand where they are from and what they are trying to achieve. So then as the older brother, then I got to tell them, like, yes, I appreciate that this is important, but be mindful that you don't get burnt out, because these are the consequences of being burnt out. And that's not a good consequence. And it's a negative spiral down. So don't get there. So that's health, right? Then finally, it's our impact. I like to, no matter what we are doing, no matter what space we are in, what is the impact that we are bringing to society? I think it's important to be deliberate and intentional about thinking about that. I think no matter what industry you're in, there's some way that you can bring some positive impact to what you're doing. So I guess it comes back to those couple of points and how to then practically weave it into building a culture and a team.
I love that. One of the things that a lot of people are talking about these days in terms of work and everything. So meaningful work, purposeful work, and all that. And I remember one of our on Flourish DX's platform, there's a video on that. Just in terms of building the PERMA. So pillars of positive psychology, and there was a video on just like imagining your kind of eulogy. I know this is very, strange to talk about, but it's like, and when you were talking about just your kind of like prolonged period of just being, like in ill health and actually don't even know whether you're going to wake up from this, that really informed what you were doing for right now, and even when you were leading Stacks. So that just reminded me, I was like, oh my gosh, Jay has actually gone through that, but in real life, and that's actually life-changing.
Yeah. Can I just add one small thing about that episode, because I think it's important. When I fell sick, so up to the point that I fell sick, it's like it came overnight. Up to that point, I've been in perfect health. I mean, I wasn't leading a healthy lifestyle, but I've been in perfect health. Like, I've never been to hospital in my life, actually. I've never been hospitalized. I've never taken more than like 3 days of medical leave. I've been perfect. And many times we think that bad things do not happen to me. I wasn't thinking of that. I was thinking of, hey, look. And so anyway, that happened at the tail end of my Cambridge, of my master's. So I was like, coming out of master's, I'm like, okay, I'm going to start up this AI startup whatsoever. And I'm at the peak of my life, So bad things, we don't tend to think that bad things can happen to us, but it can. And so that's also something else that is important. And it does inform how we want to lead our life, because we don't really know what's going to happen to us tomorrow. But I don't say that from an angle of desperation or despair. I say that from an angle of hope. Because if you don't really know what's going to happen tomorrow, you do plan for long term, you do plan for the next 50 years, but you are making a plan based on whatever I'm doing today is going to be important and impactful for the next, 50 years, for example. Yeah. But yet I need to prioritize today. I need to know that if I don't know what's going to happen to me tomorrow, and there's some minor thing, there's some trivial argument or whatsoever, then maybe that's not so important. We got to be planning. Yeah. So I think that's also something that's very important that I realized through the episode. Yeah.
Well, I think you've had a lot of perspective changes, which is really cool. And I know this episode is airing first, in January. So I think this hopefully would be a helpful kind of as people, start to plan for the year and all these things, like I hope that I'm sure, Jay, it's even helpful for me listening to it right now. Just to put things into perspective. So moving on from your time at that blockchain company, which, is all the rage right now. So I feel like kind of like you're one of the OGs in terms of like doing it even before it became kind of mainstream. So now you're on to another startup and it's called WeShine. Can you tell us a bit about that?
That really came because of COVID. So it was kind of at the beginning of COVID that, again, the world is turned upside down and people started working from home. And in Asia, at the beginning, because we had our scars from SARS, right? So I remember at the beginning, people were rather worried. And then subsequently it became worldwide. What it did for me was that it brought out, I mean, many issues around poverty and inequality has always been around, but I think that period surfaced that, not just to me, but I think to many people. I saw many reports being written about inequality. Around that period, I think Channel News Asia carried many reports about how the poorest of the poor in our neighboring countries really suffered. They have no food and whatsoever. And so it really got me. So I'm like, what can I do for these people? And that intensified and became something that I cannot ignore. And I really wanted to get into that space with the blessing of my friend who now has to. So we were kind of like co-MD. So he now had to
the company
do it
himself.
himself. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was quite worried he will kill me when I tell him that, I'm going to do this other thing. But anyway, he with his blessing, I transitioned out of that actively and started getting into the space of livelihood, looking at poverty alleviation. And when I started, to be honest, I don't have any idea what I'm going to do. So I didn't come into this thinking that, hey, I have this good business idea. I know the problem. I have no idea, but I know that the problems are out there. I wasn't sure what the world is doing. So I actually started looking at what the UN is doing, what the efforts, International Labour Organization, there's a lot of effort around this space, and it's a very complex and structural space. As I got into it, I realized that, oh wow, when we were trying to build stats, we had these big dreams. Entrepreneurs tend to have very big vision. And when I was building the fintech, we had big vision. We were like, okay, we want to build the infrastructure that can change finance, and that was huge. But when I started looking into this space of poverty alleviation, I realized that, wow, this is much bigger than anything that I can think of, because it encompasses people again, but also we're talking about jobs and skills and entrepreneurship, and we're talking about billions and billions of people. The base of pyramid, I think, according to the World Economic Forum, if I'm not wrong, they describe it as, in the world, the bottom 60%. That's a lot of people. Now, in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'm in Asia. I know Asia better. So Asia as a whole, 4 billion people. If I'm talking about the bottom 20, 25%, that's 1 billion people. And that's a very complex area to get into, So that's how I basically started. That's the why. The mission is really to improve livelihood of people. And it took many other efforts of talking to people, understanding what's the real problem, that eventually became the form that we are working on just over the last couple of months. Again, I said, before that, I kind of know the big problem, but I wasn't sure what to pinpoint into. And it's kind of like, there's all these other efforts that's out there in the world. What is the best way for me, with my knowledge and my resource, no matter how small it is, how can I fit into this entire ecosystem? Yeah, so with that, I think what we are doing is that we are trying to really provide tools and services for blue collar. So when I talk about blue collar, the bigger picture is that I think around ASEAN or Asia, the poor I kind of classify them into two areas, rural and urban. And so rural has its own problem set. So we are tackling the urban first, because urbanization continues anyway. So in that space, I think people who are in the blue collar space, they lack a lot of tools and services that are available to people like you and me. We have no lack of headhunters, LinkedIn, and whatsoever, right?
Yeah.
So how do we then make some of these services more relevant to this group? So today we're building something like a LinkedIn, but in a way that is a lot more relevant to this group. Now, when I say LinkedIn, what are the objective? I think it's really about better recommendation of how to upskill yourself, and then eventually how to get better employment that suits not just your experience, but I think it's a lot more a lot more than that. It's about your aspiration, your personality, perhaps even your skill set. Because there's a lot of skill set that are common across different industries. So how do we then use data and machine learning to bring that out? So that became something that we thought, well, there's something within the bigger ecosystem that we can potentially contribute towards.
Yeah, great. That's really super exciting. You've taken the time to study. And, with my hat on as the Chief Impact Officer, I think that process is really important, because a lot of time we go into a problem thinking that we know the solution and this works, but actually the problems are actually, the more you look at it, it kind of gets confounding that how big the problem is, and then trying to narrow in then to exactly what you're saying is that, what are my skill sets and where can I help in the giant kind of issue of poverty alleviation and livelihoods. So I'm really super excited, and of course we talk a lot, so anything that we can help as well in terms of helping you out in this area. And I think it's like we on the previous episode of just talking about workplaces, a lot of times we think workplaces are people like myself and yourself behind a computer and in an office, but so much of the world, like majority of the world, actually don't work like we do. And so I'm really passionate about just, improving workplaces, not just for, the CBD offices and all that, but workplaces across the board where people really do struggle, and, the opportunities are presented, training opportunities, all of this is not as available as for people like us who've gone through a corporate kind of graduate intake, all that kind of things. We take that so much for granted. So I guess in terms of the future, what are your hopes for workplace mental health, and even what you're building out for the people and the users of your platform, and even your own startup in terms of the people that you're hiring?
Yesterday, no, actually it's not yesterday, this week, Monday, I onboarded a new staff, and I was just, I kind of have like a Reshine family booklet, right? And so I've not looked at that for a couple of months. So I went through that, and right on top, I wrote there, of course, improving livelihood of people, but I also wrote in a way that flourishes people. And so coming into this podcast, the word flourish was mentioned. And just 5 minutes before this podcast, I was just Googling, actually, what's the definition of flourish? The dictionary says to develop in a healthy way in a congenial environment. So then I Googled what's congenial. So it says pleasant and agreeable. So I think in terms of, and that really informs how we want to be looking at workplace and my hopes for the future. Develop in a healthy way. So when we think about not just our stakeholders, our users, the people we're trying to help, but also internally, the people that we work with from a day-to-day point of view, how do we help people develop in a healthy way? Right. So that again points me back to, of course, physical health and mental wealth. How do we be healthy in and out? And then it goes on to say, as I mentioned earlier, congenial. So pleasant and agreeable as an environment. So I think perhaps we need to be mindful to make sure that we do things. There's many things that can be done, and perhaps Flourish DX will be one of those things that presents a pleasant and agreeable environment. Now, I think agreeable does not mean that we surround ourselves with people who agree. That's not what it means.
Yes, yeah.
It means that when we are in conflict, how can we resolve conflict in an agreeable manner? Yeah, so I think as you asked me the question, it comes back to this word flourish. If we can do these things and people can flourish, then both in the workplace, you see, workplace is very interesting because it takes up so many hours of our life. And if people are able to flourish in the workplace, I think quite naturally, there's a positive spillover into their outside of work life.
Yes.
So I guess that's what comes to mind, this word flourish, which is so important.
Yeah. Oh, great. I really hope that this is really a beam of hope and encouragement as we, set off in the new year, to really think about, what is it to mean to see people in our workplaces flourish and our stakeholders flourish. And I'm just really excited for your journey in terms of starting this up. To really impact the lives of blue collar workers, low wage workers, and how you can help them flourish where they're at as well, and create opportunities and bring them opportunities that otherwise it would just be really, really difficult if the friction isn't removed from their job hunting process and their onboarding and everything else. So I just want to wish you all the best, Jay. Just thank you for sharing your heart and just being really open about your near-death experience and all of that. Just like with mental health and just health issues, you just don't want to have to go through it to then have that kind of wake up call. Hypothetically, I think like you kind of say, we do know it in our mind, but then it will be so much better to have to avoid, if possible, to going through that pain, to then really see a change in how we live our lives and how we treat others and all of that. So thank you for sharing that, and just wishing you all the best. And I guess this is for me, this is such a great podcast to start the year off. Very philosophical, so a little bit different from our other ones, which I think it's so great, because I think to start the year and a new season being reflective and being purposeful, I think a lot of people will do that, hopefully, as kind of you plan. So thank you so much, and we really hope to have you back one day, with a lot of our guests, just to hear their progress and where they're at, and how their workplaces are changing and how they're changing other workplaces. Would love to hear to have you back. So thank you for your time, and wishing you a very, very blessed and successful 2022. So thank you for all the listeners who have joined us today. So just to remind you, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and also you can follow us on the LinkedIn podcast page to stay up to date with upcoming guests, which we're going to have many for the coming year. And also to follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn if you like to see the short clips of our conversations from the podcast. And you'll also find this video version on the Flourish DX YouTube page. And please do connect with Jay and myself on LinkedIn if you'd like to get in touch and continue the conversation. We love LinkedIn for the fact that, it's so easy to get connected now. So thank you very much, and wishing you a very, very great day and week ahead. Bye.